I've produced a few videos in the past, and I'm going to be honest, most of them were really sort of teaching myself how to do it. So as I continue producing more videos, I'm very likely to replace those old ones, kind of as we go, with the more updated, intentional version. In a traditional sense, a story is a very simple thing. We think it is so simple that it's actually kind of unimportant. It's something to entertain children. That is incorrect. Stories are actually the most important thing in a society. Stories are culture. And you can tell a lot about a people simply by listening to their stories. When you have a society that is not telling its stories very well, not retaining its stories, in some cases even trashing their stories and trying to come up with brand new stories that aren't actually stories, that society is in trouble. And that is definitely the United States of America in the 21st century, at least the early part of the 21st century. I'm hoping that will change. So if my ancestors are right and stories are teachings, what are they teaching? Well, the best stories teach things that are true for everyone. There are a lot of things that are called stories that only apply to a few people. What they teach is disputable. There's a story that I tell that explains a certain aspect of my culture. And people find that this story is very entertaining, but they don't like the purpose of it. There is something that modern people believe, absolutely believe. They believe it so much that it's never questioned. So as it happens, if you really do question it, you come up with the startling conclusion that what 99% of the population believes is true almost certainly isn't. And that's the reason why this story bothers people. So I'm going to tell this story, and then I have a nice little thought experiment and see if this thing that virtually every modern person believes is actually true. Okay, so was able to get the vehicle switched out. I got a nice little bus. Everybody buckle up. We are about to find out if our modern ways of thinking really are more enlightened than those poor, ignorant savages who roamed around the Pacific Northwest in the forests and along the waterways for the last 20,000 years. Or if maybe my ancestors had a better understanding of human nature than we do today. I suspect the old people were a lot smarter than we are. So, this is the story of the rejected prince. It's a very old story among my people. To give you an idea of how old it might be, my ancestors have lived in the area between Vancouver Island and Ketchikan, Alaska, that big swath of area, for about 12,000 years at least. And the reason why we know that, this is kind of a neat story. The reason why we know that is when I was living in Prince Rupert, which is kind of in the center of the coastline of where we live, someone had found some remains, and they had determined that it was 12,000 years old. It was a woman who died about 12,000 years ago, and she had a living relative who lived just a few miles away in the city of Prince Rupert. This was just absolutely astonishing. Everybody was like, that's pretty amazing, and it's kind of proof that the same people had lived in that area for a very long time. So the Rejected Prince is a story that comes out of this region. So it goes like this. There was a young man of very, very high standing in the community, expected to inherit his uncle's position and become a leader of the people. He was very active. He had all kinds of friends that surrounded him because of who he was and his status as popular, we might say in today's terms. Now, this young man had developed strong feelings for a young lady who was his cousin. This is a thing that comes up from time to time. We like to pretend that you're not supposed to have relationships with your cousin. This is very modern. Traditional times, people actually married their cousins. And if you think about it, you had to. He had developed really strong feelings for her. And he would watch her as she kind of walked around. And she was just so beautiful. And everything about her was just perfection. She, in his mind, he could see no flaw in her. He probably saw a glow every time she walked around. I mean, she was his every thought. One day, he's sitting on a log, and he's got his friends with him, and he's telling his friends, how amazing she is. And, they've heard it all before. They're getting kind of tired of it. And one of them says, well, why don't you just go talk to her? Tell her how you feel. So rather than appearing to be a coward, he decides, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to get up off of this log. I'm going to walk over there, and I'm going to tell her how I feel. So as he approaches, she, of course, has all her friends surrounding her. The thing to know about this young woman is she was, in fact, incredibly beautiful. Everybody wanted her. Everybody wanted her. And she liked the fact that everybody wanted her. And when the young man approached her, around with all of her friends kind of looking on, and he opens up and he tells her how he feels about her, her first response is not necessarily what you would think for a story like this. Her first response is, well, a lot of guys running around saying how much they care about me, how much they love me, how much they want to be with me, and it's really hard to judge whether or not any of them are sincere. And the young man is like, hey, I will do anything you ask me. I will do it to show you that my feelings for you are absolutely, totally, completely sincere. When I say I love you, I do. And she thought about it for a minute, and she kind of looked at her friends, and they all giggled a little bit. And she said, well, here's how I would know. If you would take your knife and you would slice here on the left side of your face, if you would do that to yourself just because I asked you to, well, then I would know. I would really know. I mean, it'd be kind of hard to deny that. Without hesitation, the young man took out his knife and he began cutting away at the cheek of his face, the side of his face. until it was just all bloody. All of his friends saw what was happening in horror, and all of her friends saw what was happening in horror. And everybody screamed. There was quite a commotion. And all of his friends, they came and grabbed him, and they pulled him away. And finally, sure enough, he's laying down in his sick bed. He's recovering from the injury that he's done to himself. Show this young woman how much he cares about her. All right, so before I begin, I have to remind myself, I had to pinch myself, remind myself, tie a ribbon around my finger, and all of that in order to grow this channel. It is important to spread the stories of my people so that people can understand who we were, because the stories do that. But it's also important because they do have important life messages in them. So please like, subscribe, leave comments. As we tell stories, one of the things we try not to do as a storyteller, traditional storyteller, is explain what you're supposed to get out of it. There are messages in this story. After it's done, if you have a comment, I will read the comment, I will respond. We can talk back and forth, hopefully get a lively discussion going. But please hit like and subscribe. And now on to the story. The young man finally heals, and he's figured to himself, okay, I've done exactly what she asked me to do. Now she has to accept me. He gets up, he goes and he finds her. He's got his face just mangled, just all completely mangled, and she's actually a little scared of what he's willing to do. I mean, this is kind of crazy, but he did it. Cousin, I've done what you asked. I love you. I've proven it, haven't I? Well, to be honest with you. And she was thinking to herself, now there's no way he would do this a second time. And so she's like, hey, anybody can make a gesture. I mean, anybody can say, oh yeah, you love me, yeah. But, I think you would have to do it a second time. You'd have to do that on the other side of your face. You'd have to do the same thing. And then maybe then I could really be assured that you're being sincere and honest with me. So he didn't hesitate. He took out his knife and he started mangling the right side of his face. And she just kind of stood there, not knowing what to say or do. This guy really did it. His friends, of course, come and grab him and pull him away, and now he's got to go to the healing bed again and just recover. So everything important happens in these stories 4 times. Just to kind of skip ahead, he does it again, left ear, until it's all just bloody ribbons. He does it again, right ear, until it's all bloody ribbons. And his buddies, they're just kind of watching all of this happen, and they're like, this is nuts, this is crazy. And so he finally, one of his friends asks, I mean, is there anything we can do for you? This is, we need to maybe move past all of this. And he's like, well, just one more time. Will you just go on my behalf? I mean, I'm lying here in bed. It's taking even longer to recover. I might not be able to get out of bed here. So one of his buddies, he goes and meets the girl, and she says, I'm a beautiful woman. This is what she says to the friend. I'm like really beautiful. What would people think if they saw me with this guy who's just so ugly? I mean, look at him. His face is all wrecked and his ears are just ribbons. It's just horrible. I could never marry somebody as ugly as him. And when the prince heard the princess's response, he felt so ashamed. He couldn't believe that he had gone through all of that, basically for nothing. And he realized that the only way that he could live was to leave. He had to get out of there. And as soon as he was able, he was up and he was walking down a trail out of that town. And his buddies, they kind of gathered around him. And as they walked, they started getting farther and farther away from home. And one by one, these friends, they kind of said, well, I love you, man, but, I got something I'm supposed to do tomorrow. One by one, they're dropping off. And he's going along this trail. And pretty soon, he only has one friend left. And they find themselves at a fast-moving creek or a river. The water is just moving incredibly fast. And they just realize that they're going to have to cross this. And as they're contemplating crossing this river, they notice this old woman. And she's looking across this river and she's thinking to herself, she's got to get across. And the two boys, they see that, and being well raised and having good manners, is there anything that we can do for you? Help you to get across, perhaps? And the old woman looks up and she says, well, I'm doing a lot better than the prince who was rejected by his cousin. And immediately they know that this is not actually an old woman. This is a spiritual being who has come by to advise them. And so the prince says, what can I do to restore my honor? What can I do so that I don't have to live with this shame? And she said, when you cross this river, you'll find a trail just over there by that tree. You follow that trail and you continue along that trail until you get to a house in the middle of the woods. When you get there, you shout out what it is you're there for. And this is very important. When you go inside, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not go to the right, do not go to the left, go straight to the back of the house. And the young men agreed, and they crossed the creek. The old woman had also given further instructions that only one of them would be allowed to go inside. So they knew that. And when they found the house, it was exactly as she said. And the prince, he stood out front and he said, I have come to restore my good name. I have come to wash myself of the shame that I live in today. And he was invited to come in. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness within the house that he was in, he saw the weirdest and strangest things. And he's just looking around. There are arms and legs reaching out from the walls in every direction. So he found himself as much in the middle as he possibly could be, and he walked straight to the back of the house, out of the reach of all of these arms and hands that were reaching out to grab him. So when he got to the back of the house, a young woman stepped out. She was very pretty. And she asked him why he was there. He told her. She made him sit in a giant wooden box, and she filled it with water, and she put hot stones in it. Forgot to mention, she was the daughter of the sorcerer who lived in the place. So she was learning from her father how to do all of these things. As she put the hot rocks in the water came to a boil, and the prince who was in it, well, all the flesh came off of his body. And then when they removed his bones and they laid him out on the floor, she jumped over those bones 4 times, and he was restored. And he was actually better than before because he was now perfect. When he walked outside, just really pleased and just happy about the changes in his appearance, where his friend had been sitting waiting for him was now only bones. The reason why he knew it was his friends, because the bones were wearing the clothes that the friend had been wearing. He waited even though it would kill him to do it. The other thing that the prince realized is that he was inside that house a lot longer than he thought that he was. He thought he was in there just for a few minutes, and in reality, he must have been in there for months. He told the daughter of the sorcerer what had happened, and she came out and she jumped over the bones 4 times, and the friend was restored. And then the 2 young men, they went home, and everybody just couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was the prince. No ribbons for ears. His face is not mangled. In fact, he is now the most handsome man anyone had ever seen because he is perfect. Now the princess heard the commotion. She came over to take a look, and here was the most beautiful man she had ever seen in her life. Unbelievable. It took her a second to realize who he was. Oh my gosh. Well, my cousin, I now see that you do in fact love me. You would not have gone through all of that if you didn't love me. I'm actually kind of ashamed that I made you do all of that. And because I believe you, I now absolutely accept you. We need to get married, and we need to get married right away. And the prince kind of looked at her and he's like, yeah, after everything you put me through, I don't know if you love me. And she's like, oh, no. I promise you. I promise you. You are the only man for me. I just love you. I can't believe that I've had this opportunity to be your wife. I am ready to be your wife. Let's get married. No, I just can't trust you. I will do anything to prove how much I love you. Left cheek, right cheek, left ear, right ear. You can probably imagine that when the young woman presented herself again, she was told by the prince, who was enjoying his revenge, I could never marry a woman as ugly as you. And she ran away in shame. And as she was running away, she remembered something about the story about finding a house in the woods and, some sorcerer there and this and that. And she thought, well, you know what? I'm going to do that too. I'm going to go find this house in the woods. And she does. And when she's invited to come inside, she's shocked. There's arms and hands and legs and everything just reaching out from the walls to grab at her. What the hell? Right? And she looks over to the left and she sees this pretty girl, just smiling, happy, lovely looking young woman who says, come this way. I know what you need. And she was so astonished and so frightened, she didn't know what else to do. No one had told her anything about, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not go to the right, do not go to the left, go straight to the back of the house. So she walks up to this young woman, and the arms from the wall reach out and grab her and they tear her apart. And years later, hunters out in the woods, they find her bones, and they know that it's her, the way she's dressed and necklaces and things that she might be having on. And from that day, the story was told generation after generation after generation. This is the reason why young people were not allowed to determine in our culture who they would marry. If you're 30 years old and you want to get married to the widow down the road, and that person's also 30 years old, nobody cares. But if you're young, they do care, and you're not allowed to pick your partner. What would happen is somebody might say to their mother, I like so-and-so. And the mother would approach, let's say it was the boy, the mother would approach the girl's mother. And if the two mothers agreed, then they would get the families involved. And if all the families agreed, if there was no dispute, this relative and from this relative or that relative, and all sides, everybody agreed, yeah, they would work out. They would be a good match. The families would exchange gifts, and from that day on, they were married. And that's the story. I don't know how many stories that I tell to the public, and there are very few stories that end with an explanation of why that story had to be told. There are very few, very, 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 very few. So the ancestors really wanted us to understand there's a reason we're telling you this. Now that's the first thing. I get one of three responses when I tell this story. Besides the people who agree with every part of it, I get one of three responses. One, I get people who say, well, isn't that nice? Isn't that quaint that the old people did that? Then I get people who are like, well, I wouldn't do it that way, but it sure was a neat story. I was very entertained. And yeah, there probably are one or two messages in there worth listening to. Then I get, and it never fails. It never fails. I get the person who feels very uncomfortable that they heard the message of this story. Not the story itself. Usually everybody likes that. What they don't like is the reason the story is told. For the longest time, I could never wrap my head around that. Why is it such a big deal? And I just couldn't wrap my head around this. Why? Why these three reactions? So one day, I asked a young lady who was particularly troubled, again, by the purpose of the story. Why does it bother you? And she says, no, it's not the story. She really wants me to understand that it wasn't the story that bothered her. Oh, no, the messages in the story are really good. Lots of young people should hear that story. It really has some good messages. It's very fine. It was the purpose of the story that bothered her. Why? And she told me something that first of all, I couldn't quite get why she connected this. And then I realized she was talking about her own culture. She said, well, for centuries and centuries and maybe thousands of years, women were bought and sold like they were cattle. And I would ask around, and sure enough, I found out that a lot of people with the modern mentality believe this. The reason why there was arranged marriages was so that women could be bought and sold. I have a little thought experiment to take you through. I'm going to tell you another little story, right? So I tried to pick somebody people in the dominant culture would recognize as being a part of their heritage. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin had, as far as we know, only one child, a son. That son, William, I believe his name was the Governor General of the United States. Well, before it was the United States. So in effect, he was kind of the president. So Ben Franklin had a pretty significant son. Prior to about 100 years ago, you had to have parental permission to get married. No ifs, no ands, no buts, and this is universal. So, the question is, was that so that families could buy and sell their daughters? Was that the reason? Did it happen for that purpose? I don't believe it did. So let's get back to old Bill Franklin. So here he is. He's in love with this girl. And in society 200 years ago, he had to get the father's permission. So he goes to the father of the girl, and the father says no. Poor Bill. His hopes are dashed. He's heartbroken. But after a few months, he gets over it, and he develops a crush on another young lady. Goes to talk to her father. No. And then old Bill, by the way, all Northwest Coast Indian stories have, the important part happens 4 times. Since that was the tradition that I was raised in, we're going to put poor Bill Franklin through this 4 times. So the 3rd time he shows up, Dad says no. 4th time, he finds a girl he likes, the girl likes him, everybody's happy, shows up, and finally we find a dad who's gonna let Bill Franklin marry his daughter. Here's the question that I have. Were there any fathers 200 years ago in Ben Franklin's day who loved their daughters? I mean, I really want you to think about that. Sure, there were probably fathers who didn't love their daughters at all. We have fathers today who don't love their daughters. So it's pretty easy to speculate on the existence of terrible dads who don't love their daughters. It's easy to speculate that that is true. But is that normal in Ben Franklin's day? Is that normal? Because what you're saying is people didn't care about their daughters. It really can't be true. That just defies reality. That just defies human nature. What man raises a girl and doesn't care about her? Yeah, there's some really awful fathers out there. But that's normal? Why is it that every culture, until about 100 years ago, every culture required parental approval before young people could get married, including mine, as this story shows? Why? Could it be that young people have no idea who they should be with? Could it be that in the old days it mattered? It really mattered who you were married to. Because if you were irresponsible, you died. If you were married to somebody that you couldn't get along with, you died. So you had to be matched up with somebody that you would work out with. And your parents probably had a better idea than you who that would be. They know how immature you are. They know that you can't make that choice on your own. So they chose for you, and virtually every society had some version of this. Anyway, something to think about. Until next time, I'm your friendly neighborhood Raven speaker saying, "Det mal geknietsen."